set up. I'll say a few words about this, and then about Secretary Litcher, soon to be Secretary Litcher, and then you can fire away anything else you got. Great to be here at Manpower here in Appleton, the Fox Valley. We wanted to particularly be here to thank State Senator Roger Roth and State Representative Jim Steineke for the work that they did on this measure to improve recruitment and retention reform in the state of Wisconsin. We thought it was only fitting for a company that's based global headquarters here in the state to be here at Manpower, where they help clients every day deal with recruiting and retaining some of the best talent in the world. That's what we're trying to do with state government. We want to make sure that we continue to improve on that. Again, we were able to pass legislation that's now the law of the state that keeps in place the basic merit premise that we've had in the state before. So merit, prohibitions against discrimination and favoritism that were there before in civil service remain, but this allows us to take a step forward into the 21st century. It opens up the process so that anyone can, not just those in state government, but anyone in or outside of state government can seek out positions in state government, puts money aside, $6 million to help provide merit compensation for some of the top employees, and does a series of other things to streamline the process going forward. And so it's still a system based on merit. It's still a system where there has to be reasonable expectations in terms of job termination. But like I said, it really opens us up to how hiring and firing is done in the 21st century. We want to be able to recruit as well as retain the top employees out there. And this new law now allows us to do that going forward. And I want to thank all the lawmakers, not only those here, but those that not only voted for it, but went through the entire process of, even before the legislative process, working with our cabinet and our administration on making sure the legislation that's now become the law really addresses the multitude of issues that have been identified in the past. Separately, obviously this afternoon we announced that John Litcher is going to be my new appointee for Secretary of the Department of Corrections. As many of you know or have learned, John Litcher has had a distinguished record in public service. Most recently, after he had left state government, he had come back again to a position he'd had in the past, or a type of position he'd had in the past in terms of being a superintendent within a school district. That's where his many degrees are involved in education. He worked under Governor Tommy Thompson in a multitude of capacities, the last of which was under both Governor Thompson and then Governor McCallum as Secretary of the Department of Corrections. He's got a stellar record there. Secretary Ed Wall gave us a letter of his resignation last week, and it was subject to going through March, with the idea being that he thought there needed to be, I talked to him about this, he thought there needed to be a fresh start. And once it was clear after I sat down Wednesday and had a face-to-face discussion with John Litcher that he was ready to go and willing to take on this challenge, Ed Wall modified his original letter to move up the date. His main interest is making sure that we're able to put in place someone who could take on the position. So John Litcher will be taking over as the Secretary of the Department of Corrections at the end of the month. And again, I think his years of experience and not only great credentials, but the great amount of respect and credibility that he had with Republican and Democrats alike in the legislature at the time he served, as well as throughout the communities he served in. I think just in government in general, he was highly respected by staff as well as administrative officials. And I think, as was mentioned, it will give us a tremendous opportunity to take a fresh step going forward, address some of the concerns that have been raised in the past, continue to improve on that. And I have every expectation that when he comes up for confirmation, that the members of the state Senate will recognize that great track record.
The FBI has opened a civil rights investigation into Lincoln Hills. Do you think they'll find federal violations there?
Well, the federal government's been involved for some time, has been noted previously, as was the Wisconsin Department of Justice. I don't know what they'll find. My expectation is that the staff there and anywhere else in the Department of Corrections is going to do what they've done in the past, and that is fully cooperate. As we've mentioned several times before, the State Department of Corrections, obviously, more than a year ago, when they had concerns about a few individuals, took those seriously enough that they forwarded that to both the Wisconsin Department of Justice as well as to the local officials in terms of the Sheriff's Department in the presiding county. Late last year, when the Wisconsin Department of Justice, which is independent from my administration, raised concerns to us, we took action, instructed the Secretary to take aggressive action there. And I think as part of their investigation, that prompted federal authorities to take a look at that as well. But I'm not going to presume anything other than my expectation is that both at the state and the federal level, if there are individuals or an individual that has violated the law, that there be consequences for that. And we're going to make sure that the people at the Department of Corrections, anyone else in state government, works closely with both federal and state officials.
Is Wall's resignation in regard to the Racine County juveniles?
No. He wasn't secretary at the time. That was 4 years ago.
Does this have anything to do with what happened at Lincoln Hills?
Well, I think in this case, what the secretary has said is it's the point where he thinks going forward there needs to be a fresh start. This gives him an opportunity to go back. He had a fine record and reputation in law enforcement. I think he wants to go back into that going forward. He stepped up to serve the state in that capacity. But I think it's just one of those where bringing in someone like John Litcher, who he has a lot of respect for, as do others, gives an opportunity to have a fresh start and continue to be aggressive in addressing those issues.
Can you be clear on the timeline as to when your office and DOC learned that the FBI was taking over the investigation, and also when you learned about this Racine County letter? Well, obviously you learned about it 4 years ago, or your office did, but...
Right. Yeah, two different parts. On the federal government, again, we've asked the Wisconsin Department of Justice to be involved, and they've been working with federal officials in terms of the exact time of activity and whether or not they're continuing or phasing out. They'll have to respond to that. That's something that we've given them wide open access to Department of Corrections. That's something really they'll have to comment on what their intentions are and what their timeline is. In terms of the letter, which was one of nearly 350,000 constituent contacts I got in the year 2012, one of nearly 1 million contacts I've gotten since I was governor. So put that in perspective. In 2012 alone, there was almost 350,000 contacts from constituents across the state of Wisconsin. In this case, we went back when the inquiry was made, and then we provided information to additional individuals who'd asked about it. They went back and did a track. They went and looked at it by the name of the individual, found that in the tracking from about this time 4 years ago, found on the record that it was initially by staff that handles, in this case, it was a written letter as opposed to emails or faxes or other documents, which increasingly more and more, as you can imagine, the same way that you guys get information more and more electronically, but this was a physical letter, was not only sent into the office, opened up, looked at, initially passed on to staff that handles policy. There's a system by which the supervisor involved with constituent services sends a check on any issue that's been pending for any extended period of time, send a notice to this individual, and then I believe after that, they sent it a few weeks later after the original response to the Department of Corrections. And at that time, I think many of you got the information about that from Corrections. The Department of Corrections, the person who was the division head at that time 4 years ago, had already corresponded with some of the officials in Racine County. My understanding was that they again responded to that, talked about the corrective actions that have been taken, agreed with the comments from the individuals from Racine County that they found it unacceptable as to what had happened. In that case, it was unlike what they're looking at right now, which is staff issues. This was a matter of juvenile and juvenile offense. And what they did was change the policies, put in place a change in terms of training for reporting that was done shortly thereafter. All that was documented in that. But it's something that neither I nor my senior staff had looked at. It was really between staff who then forwarded it to Department of Corrections. And I should note, I believe, we'll go back and verify this for you, but I know with some of the stories today, the program that the county has in terms of juveniles has been around for some time. It's something actually I talked about when I was a county executive with the then Racine County executive. It's an innovative program they've looked at for some time, but I believe they still have juveniles at Lincoln Hills. I believe, I don't know if it's exactly 10 today, but it's in the range of 10 male juveniles and 1 female.
I want to jump back to the bill, because that's what you were here for today,
We'll hear
obviously.
that, sure.
Can you talk to me a little bit about the cost and how much it's going to cost the state?
Well, long term, we think it'll provide savings. There's specifically $6 million that was allocated, and that's just for performance merit-based incentives as bonuses for employees that perform at high levels, that provide savings to the taxpayers, that find ways to increase and provide greater services for the people of the state. All those like private businesses and governments and elsewhere do. But really in terms of that, the long-term benefit potentially is savings in terms of streamlining the hiring process, being able to recruit and retain people sooner, and benefits in that regard. But the main dollar amount that was included was $6 million. That, again, is just for merit-based bonuses.
A judge found,
Here in Nuggets, Jay.
a judge found the handling of that abuse allegation in 2012 so egregious, he went out of his way to write a letter to you to say, I'm not sending any more kids there. Do you, am I misunderstanding that you're saying that's the same as any of the other 350,000 pieces of
No. I'm just putting
things
in
you get?
context.
And should it not be something that comes to at least the attention of your senior staff?
Well, again, I just point that out in terms of the volume. In this case, I think it may very well have been moved up the chain if the Department of Corrections hadn't had a response and hadn't been in communications with those officials. I think the fact is, as we noted, was noted in today's stories and as we point out in information provided, the Department of Corrections, specifically the division head at that time, did react to the concerns that not only this judge but others in Racine County had, and had already gone through the process of explaining that they agreed with the concern and they had taken action.
Racine County says that the family of this juvenile who had been sexually assaulted and beaten was never notified by your Department of Corrections. What do you say to that, and what do you say to the family?
Well, I don't have information about that directly. I'd have to have corrections look at that. That's not something I look at.
If a teenager is beaten and sexually assaulted, should the family be told?
Absolutely, but what I'm saying is I don't know whether that's accurate or not. I'd have to look at that. I don't have information about that. We looked at specifically was, when did it come in, how was it handled, where did it go, what was the action the Department of Corrections provided, and as I mentioned, the Department of Corrections took aggressive action, not just in that instance, but as you and others have reported, went through and actually did a series of training, both about reporting and even about the situation in terms of the circumstances of that. But to me, it's obviously completely unacceptable, which is why they took action.
Will the new secretary be looking at any possibility of closing Lincoln Hills?
What I talked to John Litcher about is, for someone who's as respected as he is, that we weren't taking any options off the table there or anywhere else. So if he came in and made recommendations to me, not only about that institution, but about anything else in the Department of Corrections, we would take that seriously. I think it's a nice combination. He's been out of corrections for quite some time, but yet he's got extensive experience there, specifically with Lincoln Hills. Not only does he have experience in corrections, he's got tremendous background both before and after being secretary in terms of education and dealing with young people. And so obviously any recommendations he made in that regard we would take very seriously, not just in terms of what he's recommending, but working with Milwaukee County. As I mentioned, Racine County, but Racine County, despite what the judge had said 4 years ago, actually appears to still be sending juveniles. Again, as far as I can tell, there's 10 individuals related to Lincoln Hills who are there from Racine County and 1 female. Again, we can get you documentation on that. But whether it's them or any other county, from our standpoint, we're willing to look as a former county official. I know one of the biggest concerns counties had was about the cost that juvenile correctional institutions had for years, for decades in many cases. It's why initially when the number had dropped enough that it was questionable as to whether you needed to have 2 facilities, it's why the decision was made to go from 2 to 1. It was really because of reaction to the counties. And it's why Racine County many, many years ago, before 2012, had gone forward with this program to try and find a way to provide those services at a lower cost. And actually it's lobbied the legislature, as I recall at the time, to make changes so that they could hold juveniles longer than counties could previously. But from our standpoint, that our goal is to say we're willing to work not only with the new secretary, but with lawmakers, with county officials, be they Milwaukee, Racine, or any other county, if they've got alternative ways that we think meet their needs and meet the needs of protecting society from those individuals that a judge feels seriously enough to sentence to more than a year's worth of incarceration, but at the same time to make sure that once that's done, that those individuals are safe, as well as the staff and any visitors. That's our priority. and we'll be going forward.
Secretary Wall has the ability to go back to DOJ's Division of Criminal Investigation. Is that in any way playing a role in why FBI is taking lead on this investigation?
No, I don't believe, you have to confirm with them, but I don't believe that their, any of their decisions about that are in any way related to them knowing about the timing of this. And that's something that, again, you have to talk to the Attorney General's office about what they plan on doing. They may have a process by which they'll deal with that as well.
Hillary Clinton mentioned to you last night. She said that she wasn't sure if you were, serious enough about higher education. Any rebuttal to what she said yesterday?
Sure. It's a little bit ironic that a woman who took $600,000 from a Wall Street firm while I was freezing tuition for 4 years in a row would talk about higher education. I think our record's pretty clear. We froze tuition 4 years in a row. It made it more affordable for college students and families here. And while we were doing that, she was cashing in big bucks from Wall Street firms on the speaking turret.
Jeff Plaley, there was a scandal at the Railroad Commissioner's office. Jeff Plaley resigned. There's a scandal at Corrections, and now Ed Wall resigns. Do you think the public looks at this and thinks there's no way you're not asking these heads of your cabinet, your Secretary of Cabinet, to resign?
Well, I mean, for us, the bottom line is we want to talk about what our next steps are and where we're going forward. In the case of Ed Wall, like I said, he's got the opportunity to go back into law enforcement, whether it's in his previous capacity or something similar to that, and that'll be up to the Attorney General. And I think you can all appreciate anybody who'd gone through this. I think it's abundantly clear for the issue that was raised today. He wasn't even in office at that point as the Secretary. And as the Department of Justice has mentioned, not just I have said it, but they've said it to you as well, they made it very clear when they came to us last year that they didn't believe the Secretary or others in his area that this had risen to them in terms of them even being informed of it. If it had been, we would not have continued to have him employed as the Secretary back then. I just think it's as simple as Ed Wall realizes that with the issues that are out there, he believes it would be fundamentally easier going forward if someone like John Litcher, a new Secretary with a great degree of credibility, but someone who's new to the situation, not new to corrections, but new to the situation, is able to come in and I think restore some of the credibility in that agency. And I think that's good. I think that's what the public expects. They want us going forward to make sure that if there are problems, we correct them, and that's what we're doing.
That's all we have time for.
Great. Thanks, guys.
Thank you.
Thanks.